Hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Fortum. I'm the host of this podcast, Doers Within Emerging Markets. And I just want to share my experience with using Anchor so far. When the pandemic started, I thought about starting a podcast, and the whole idea was to bring in some really amazing folks that are doing some great work in their respective industries within the emerging markets. And the Anchor platform really helped me get the word out there and also just make it a lot easier for me to invite the guest and just share the amazing experiences they've had and the amazing work they're doing in their respective industries within the emerging markets. So it's pretty fun. You don't even worry about the technical part of making a podcast. You actually just focus more on the content. And Anchor has done it really well for me. So I will highly encourage anybody who is trying to start a podcast to try to use. Just check out Anchor, and I think you won't regret it. I'm not a technical person, but if you listen to these episodes that I've been publishing so far, it seems like I know what the technical part of it, but Anchor helps you take care of the technical part, and you just focus on the content. So feel free to check it out. I highly encourage. You won't regret it, and it's right there. You don't pay anything. So in times like this, I think starting a podcast and getting the word out there, irrespective of what you're doing, will be a really great experience. So thank you guys for listening to my episodes. Please check out Anchor, and you will have a great time. So cheers, guys, and see you guys next episode. Thanks.
And so you were saying that hardware startups are just it has a long runway, and that was something that, based on the timeline that was offered by Impact Lab or Makerspace and all that, it didn't like match.
Yeah. So that's a great way to put it. I think, and your runway is often decided by how much money and resources you have on ground, whether that's human capital or actual monetary capital, right? So if you're coming with the bigger grants and bigger bootstrap or better funding, some of the things you could speed up because you can take that money, not only hire more people, but bring in the actual tools and parts you need to work on this faster. But yeah, I think sometimes there's a little bit of disconnect in terms of different programs such as hackathons or whatever the workshops that are being held, and because the people are coming from a good place, they come from a good heart, but they're not necessarily the people who have ever maybe necessarily run a startup, or let alone a harder startup, so they may not be necessarily aware of those time constraints or time limitations or challenges that are faced. So I think I think the hackathon that run by Impact Hub was one of the better ones that I've seen, especially in Rwanda. There's many. And they definitely took the feedback. So I think next time when they do the things, they have incorporated those practices. But yeah, that was a challenge for us in the first 6 months, and especially working where the donated money. But still, in the end, we were able to use that money, create our actual big first prototype. We had a little pivot around that in terms of the product we were making. And that gave us a lot of good insights for our first couple of months. So we're still very thankful for having that opportunity and the ability to just pitch to different people and get that feedback right away. Because when you're working on something, you're stuck in your own bubble. So it's good to always get diverse set of feedback on what other people think on how we're tackling something.
For sure. So what do you think? I mean, a couple of questions here. What do you think should change? And how do you think organizations, I know we've talked offline, but you have recommended some ways that things can be much more effective, or maybe you can have a higher return on the success rate of startups.
Yeah.
What from your experience, and I know you've been there for a while, what do you suggest that let's say specifically the private sector or NGOs or grants can do to make things better in Rwanda?
Yeah, so I will say it's somebody from being an entrepreneur and somebody who's also part of the startup ecosystem in another role that I run the chapter for Startup Grind. So I'm the director of Startup Grind Kigali. I think there's a couple of challenges. I think, one of the things we got to understand is that the Kigali or Rwanda startup scene is very, 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 very young, meaning that it's not only the time that we're just having startups come in, but also, more than 95% of the entrepreneurs are first-time founders. So it's their first time launching something, and the numbers are often against people launching something for the first time and being really successful. So there's a couple of things to look at, right? First of all, I think being this young country, entrepreneurship is built into people's blood, right? That is often not true in a lot of places in Africa sometimes, but in the greater part of the world, right? Because people may not have access to the best means, and that has changed, but there's a part of like hustling and fighting for something that you want. So I think a lot of people generally have some of the skills of being an entrepreneur through other aspects of their life, whether professional or personal. But however, Kigali, when we compare to other ecosystems such as in Nairobi or what's happening in Lagos, Accra, Cape Town, Joburg, Kampala, when I got there, it's the first time there was a, co-working spaces just opening up a couple of months, and then it's more open when I got there. So our hubs that are focusing on entrepreneurship, incubator, etc., was just starting to launch. If you look at what's been happening in Kenya or other places that I mentioned, they've had these hubs or entrepreneurship focused centers for people to come and get help and resources on network opportunities, been running for more than a decade now, right? So there's a lot more resources and money being flown into those ecosystems. The biggest thing I think also is that since there's a lot of first-time entrepreneurs, and since there's a lot of aid and development and grant money that is being invested into Rwanda, which is great for many things, but it sometimes does hurt the startup ecosystem because it creates an environment where we expect that as a startup or a company, we're going to apply for different grants or different cash prizes and use that our investable money and live from a paycheck to paycheck on that level. So it hurts in the sense that not only entrepreneurs get super busy because these applications are super competitive and not the easiest thing in the world. So you're spending a lot of time applying for these because that's the only money that's being invested, right? There's basically non-existent seed money or angel money, for example, or it's not impossible, but it's challenging. For example, let's say to entrepreneur here in the US or in Asia, it's harder to bootstrap that cash among your friends and family. People still do, but it is not that easy. So you have created a mentality where a lot of projects or even private things are just starting out based on different grants that are given by donor agencies. So grants have their place and they're crucial in many impactful projects, but that needs to be separated from the startup ecosystem in the sense that because anything with money, especially grants, they come with their own objectives and timeline, which may not necessarily align with the startup's objectives or timeline, or that a startup may realize, of a 6-month or a year-long grant project that 2 months later that this is something that they should be working in, they need to pivot and try something else, but they're tied. And then the other thing is that sometimes a little bit of that, there's not much of entrepreneurs who are starting things. A lot of great people. I often every week or so, and I'm on the ground there, I'm running into 1 or 2 entrepreneurs. They're working on really, I would call them more of innovators, because they're really working on cool software stuff or hardware things that they're tinkering away. And they're creating these MVPs, but they haven't really gone out and talked to potential customers. So we're doing a little, this is this, like a decade back or so, when I had launched my first company as a freshman in college, I was one of the youngest person to go actually pitch and win this business competition, right? And that has completely changed in what's happening in the US, right? That is now like, it's an anomaly if you're not working on a startup in your freshman year. But what happens is that we have so much glamorized the startup and entrepreneurship world that all we think is that, hey, you come up with the super cool idea, and then you will find this VC or investor who will put in that, write you a check, and you're gonna take that, and that's how you're gonna make a business and start earning or getting customers, earning money. When the reality is that ideas don't really mean anything, and it's really about execution. And even before you execute, you really got to understand your customer and create a business model that does work. So often entrepreneurs, again, because they're being often first-time entrepreneurs, or going through programs that are just teaching them the things. There's too much training happening in Rwanda and Africa in general, and then actual business making or testing and failing. So, and when people fail, right, I think it's a little bit of the culture is that failure is still not acceptable, right, in the society. Or it is often, it's a taboo, or it's a very negative thing. So I think these are the things that have to change a bit to a certain extent in the ecosystem to flourish, because the entrepreneurs are there. People have the ideas and the skills and the talent to really build successful companies, but we gotta change a couple of things in the ecosystem to really enable them to do so. And few changes have been happening there, right? But then again, there's still a long path to go through.
For sure.
So that's my long answer.
No, thanks for sharing. I think that's the essence of the pod, is to kind of give the real, kind of bring to light some of these, I might say nuance, might seem obvious, but coming from someone who has been there, I think that brings to light a lot of some things that we should be considering about the future, right? You mentioned the grants and how they have a different strategy that comes with it, and it doesn't really reflect what a startup is. I mean, something that is really important, and I think you might agree, or definitely might agree with me, is, creating a demand side before you start a business, right? There has to be a demand.
Exactly.
That business stuff. And just kind of, we'll have a fun round session that I'll love to share with you. Before that, what is any advice you give to people that want to go into Rwanda and start a business? What is maybe one or two things that you should have in your mind based on this, based on your experience, for them to consider before they move in there to either start an entrepreneurship and one?
So I assume this is for the expat founder, just like myself, or whether the expat founder is from Europe, US, or parts of the Americas, Asia, or even Africa. I think the mindset you gotta, and this is something it's easier to now look back, is to come up with a little bit of an actionable plan of how you're going to be working with different stakeholders for whatever problems you're solving, and not just only customers, right? It is very easy to come into Rwanda, start a business, right? You do it online, and as fast as 6 hours, you're registered. There's no fees. There's a little bit of taxes you pay monthly, but that's pretty much it. And anybody can go open a business. But then you really got to be start thinking from day one, especially if you don't have a network yet, is to how you're going to work with different ministries of government, or how you're actually going to work with maybe NGOs or donor agencies, if that makes sense, or any private businesses that are on the ground. So I think that's sometimes people may have ignored to a little certain extent, but how can you work together is often very critical in whatever things you want to solve. The other thing is also having this mindset. I think experts sometimes don't necessarily have this mindset, because we have seen successful models of using Rwanda as a test pilot for a lot of projects. So that is always great. But coming with the mindset of how you can do something in Rwanda and continue to grow, and perhaps implement that solution in other parts of Africa, definitely in the neighboring countries in East Africa or Asia or wherever, but then also continue to stay in Rwanda and making that impact, not just using the country as a test bed and come in and leave. And then the third thing is kind of, I think, I'm forgetting what was I going to say, but I think what was I going to say?
The first great.
Yeah, no. There's something I had. It's the part you cut off. That
is a cultural thing.
It will come back to me. I think maybe it was a culture or something, but it will come back to me. I think.
Those two were really insightful. Yeah. I think those things, what you mentioned, are very important regardless. And I think that really helpful how we think of, going back and not just doing for ourselves, but like trying to build a local economy as well. I really appreciate that. We'd love to have you again on the pod and definitely be able to share more on things that we can be thinking about, especially Africans in diaspora, Caucasians, whoever who wants to really be.
Yeah. No, definitely. I think there's always a way for people to go and learn. Okay, so that's what I was gonna say. I think sometimes that, and it happens on both sides. Sometimes I think as foreigners, regardless of how much experience that we have working in different parts of the world, we think we know the solution or a way to solve a problem, and we end up there with that mentality, right? And again, it differs slightly in every different industry or sector you may be working in. But then sometimes you gotta be, or what I've seen, companies that have been successful by expats, is to really work with people on the ground there and actually hear from them, and not just your customers, right? People who you're gonna be hiring and working with them, not just as people operators to run something, but actually have an open dialogue and understand what they need. Because no matter how much time you've spent there and how much you're an expert and know about the industry, you're bound to fail if you don't really understand a lot of the local context that may not be that clear when you're reading stuff online or when you're working with partners. So always be a little bit open. I think I've seen that as a challenge to some of foreigners who are trying to launch companies, or sometimes as key to their success when they've really understood and involved people who actually grown up and lived there, right, and built things. And then the other side of that is also, I think sometimes entrepreneurs in Rwanda are very quick to copy the things that are happening in the West or even in different African countries and just implement that solution or launch that service or product, and then really not grow or build that customer base because they fail to understand some of the slight nuances or differences that do exist in Rwanda, right? You cannot just say it's a developing country or frontier market or it's an African country. You really got to understand that, what is a consumer market like? What is a consumer spending market like? How do B2B relationships really work? They're not impossible, but they're pretty hard and rare especially for a startup company to have those kind of business models. So we're too quick to copy something, usually from the West, but not these even from Asia or similar developing emerging markets, and just slap something together and launch that without really understanding what are the consequences of not fully understanding your customer base.
For sure. No, thank you so much. Those are three really, really helpful, insightful steps, ways of thinking about to be successful in Rwanda. So thanks for sharing that. So we have a fun round. Just 2 questions. What was your favorite food in Rwanda?
So I've been thinking that I've been missing a lot. So there's a few. There's something called sombe, which is pressed cassava leaves. It looks like spinach to somebody who's never seen cooked. But I really like that, especially when sometimes combined with ground nuts or peanuts. There's akabens, it's like pork meat. And I think some are like, there's something called mizuzu. It's just sweet plantains, whether they're fried or they're like dipped in honey. Those are the things I mentioned. Of course, like the go-to foods are like brochettes, which you get everywhere else. And missing 1 or 2 of my favorite junks in Rwanda. They're so really good brochettes.
And what's the favorite place you recommend for people to visit once they get to Rwanda?
The whole country is super beautiful, but if I have to just pick one and only, there's a place called Kibuye or Karongi. It's on the lake Kivu, and it's hilly, and you can either go to the beach or just stay in the mountains and really get to disconnect with everything else going on. It's super beautiful at any time of the year.
Awesome. And bonus question, if you met His Excellency Paul Kagame?
I have not met him directly. I have seen him and he has seen me, but I'm still waiting to actually shake hands and directly meet him and hopefully get a conversation with him. So hopefully very soon.
Abhinav, thank you so much for being here, sharing your wisdom, experience. I think people will learn a lot from this, your story. And I know you're going to do great things in 2021 and beyond. So we're looking forward to having you again on the pod. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And I hope to come back and share what's next for us. Please definitely go check out. It's really easy to check out. Tourism is great, but then please spend some time in Rwanda and explore. And you can also reach out to me on abhinavgautam.net and just connect with me if you have any questions. So thank you so much.
Anytime. And so, to you guys, Abhinav on the pod, such an honor to have him. And I'll see you guys in the next episode.